Hi, everybody. Welcome to the first Paddock Pass podcast of the year. Well, in terms of MotoGP, that is. So apologies to Steve English and Gordo for their fine work in World Superbike so far. But we are still in the first initial days and weeks of the year, guys. And we're not in the Netherlands and we're not in Barcelona. We're actually in Italia. How have you been, Dave? How many coffees have you had so far?
I haven't had as many as I would need. But it's been busy, really, basically. That's why. It's been pretty sort of full on almost from the start of the day.
And in contrast to the popular opinion, it's very good to see your face and to be in your company again, I have to say.
It's good to see my Spanish friends.
And Neil, you're towering over both of us as usual. Why are we in Italy?
We are here in the Sky Studios in Milan to attend the Aprilia preseason presentation, where we had a chance to speak to some of the management and to their new riders, Jorge Martin and Marco Bezzecchi.
Dave, considering your view on team presentations and their general level of usefulness, how do you kind of rate this event we've been to this morning here in Italy?
Do you know what? I'm going to give it 8 out of 10. This is just about the perfect length.
We're doing ratings for presentations now, are we?
Well, why not? Why not? We can rate everything. We shall. For a start, the food was class, but apart from that, there was plenty of information there. There was just enough information at this point. You know, they've all ridden the bikes. Bezzecchi and Martin have only ridden the bikes at Barcelona for a day. Martin was saying he was riding while I was still hungover, so it was a bit difficult to tell too much. The information given was good. It was given in English, which I think is really important if we're trying to grow this into an international sport. Sorry, yes, we're in Italy. We've got Italian riders, Italian team principals, Italian bike, Italian factory. But yeah, it's an international sport. Unfortunately, Italian isn't.
It's a world championship.
It's a world championship, and by a stroke of good fortune, as far as we're concerned, English is the lingua franca, or language of the Franks.
Well, what was the Neil Morrison rating for the food?
Probably a 9.
Oh, wow. That is lofty praise indeed.
It was, yeah.
We're going to ask you your rating for the coffees because, the food was good. What was it? Go on, rate the coffee.
Well, I just don't understand the medicinal kind of measures, really. I mean, why does it have to be so short?
Italian coffee.
And what's wrong with milk? There's nothing wrong with milk. You can put milk in coffee.
Yeah, no, you can't.
Big thanks to Renthal, renthalstreet.com. Have a look on the Renthal website if you want to customize your motorcycle, your street bike. It's not only off-road, they have a lot of stuff for your street bike as well. So go and have a look there. They're hopefully on board with us again this year, taking a little punt here in the first podcast of 2025. Guys, you pretty much summed it up so far, but, you know, people looking at the presentation of Aprilia for 2025, you know, they're going to be asking questions. I think, Neil, you asked it best to Aprilia Racing CEO Massimo Ribola when you said that there's a lot that's new about the team this year. But as I said, most fans will be looking at the images online, looking to what the bike is like. So in that aspect, no great shakes. I mean, it's almost like a reputable Honda-ish makeover. It looks very similar. It's dark, you know.
More sponsors, a lot more stickers and a lot more sponsors. And Massimo Rivola did say that, yes, we've got more sponsors have come on board. They still don't have a title sponsor, but they're holding out for someone who's willing to actually pay the value of being a title sponsor. And he also mentioned again, you know, if Liberty do take over, Liberty being very good at improving the branding of F1, and that would help them enormously.
Yeah, and having the number 1 in the garage and on the front of one of their bikes has also helped bring in quite a few new sponsors as well. So I think that's probably the most notable thing. But yeah, I mean, the Aprilia's always been fairly beautiful in the last couple of years. I don't think it needs a massive makeover. Black with little bits of silver and red, and you're away. I mean, it was already a great looking bike, and I think they've managed to retain that.
It was a tight team presentation, 30 minutes. You know, we heard from all the important people, even Max Biaggi as the Aprilia ambassador. He kind of pretty much opened proceedings. And then we had some media debriefs afterwards where we got to speak to the riders as well as the senior management. And that, I'd say the words from Stellacchini and also Ribola, Dave, were probably the most interesting of the day, because not only did they talk about the developments that need to happen to the motorcycle, but a little bit about the aspect of MotoGP overall, because I think not just media, but fans would be interested to know how does a team, how does a factory continue to make big investments when you can see the likes of KTM and their situation and the very real possibility that there could be 4 less motorcycles on the grid in 2026?
Yeah, I mean, Massimo Rivola also was very clear that he didn't believe that KTM would leave. He was convinced that KTM would stay. He said, MotoGP needs KTM. He's probably a little bit better connected than we are, so you would hope that he knows it, and probably knows a little bit more about running a motorcycle factory. But I mean, it does need, it needs more exposure. It's an expensive sport. It's a technically expensive sport. In 2015, 2016, once we had the spec electronics and a spec tire, and when they made the sport a lot more spec, the whole thing was done to reduce costs. But of course, regulation stimulates innovation, because all of the engineers immediately started looking for ways around the not being okay, well, I can't use electronics to do this, let's do something else, let's find another way to do it. So we've come to the point where we need another sort of big step to change everything, to slow everything down, and to bring the field a little bit closer together again.
And that's where it almost comes back to the aspect of the bike, because I think Stellacchini said something in Italian like the motorcycles that we saw on stage will be what the 10 versions of, the 10 models that was the Sepang test will come out with. But that's kind of usual, isn't it? I mean,
that's extremely unusual, and so unusual that I don't believe it. I had a really good look at the bikes. Normally, what you use, because what you're showing at a launch is the color scheme. So you're showing you're just showing off the logos and the colours and the sponsors and all the rest of it. And really, as far as that can, but you might as well put a 2013 bike there instead of a 2025 bike. You just want something. You just want a canvas to paint on. But actually, looking at it, it's a 2025 frame that was on there. That was different. There were some aero updates. The front aero, the wings, and the intake were 2024. I checked with some photos while the presentation was on. But you could also see that they've actually worked on one of the big problems with the Aprilia has been heat, getting rid of heat. You can see that they've changed some of the internal ducting already to try to channel some of the heat away underneath the seat and away into the wake of the motorcycle.
We'll come back to the bike in a moment, Neil, but it says something where one of the manufacturers in MotoGP are struggling to the point of a lot of speculation, and KTM senior management can only say so much until they have various kind of legal loopholes to jump through and administration processes to be completed. But here we are at Aprilia. They invited a good spread of international media. The event was flashy. It was showy. We're going to have 10 Aprilias in Sepang, because you're going to have the 4 factory bikes as well for Raul Fernandez and Ayagura and the Trackhouse Racing setup. Lorenzo Savadori as well, also testing 2 in Malaysia. It seems like one factory is foundering, but the other one is actually really prospering. That was the impression we had today.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't think the Aprilia factory has really been in a situation where it's been able to provide such an even sort of spread of new motorcycles to its riders before. So there is an indication that Aprilia is going absolutely 100% into this situation. They have a wonderful opportunity now that they've managed to pull off, the coup of last season by luring Jorge Martin across. And everything that we heard today indicated, a great deal of excitement and enthusiasm for the year ahead. Would like to add that is absolutely normal, and it's very rare to come to one of these team presentations in January of a year before everyone's hopes and dreams have been dashed by the hard slap of reality.
There's the first slice of cynicism of the season. Thank you.
Yeah, but aside from that, there was a feeling that everyone is just so delighted to have Jorge on board. Even Bezzecchi was talking about how much he feels that he can learn from having the number one on the other side of the box, and Martin stopped short of saying that they'll be fighting for the championship, but he did provide a situation in which he could imagine himself and the team maybe being up there and scrapping at the front regularly.
He was glowing with optimism, wasn't he?
He was,
yeah. it was also interesting that Stellacchini did say that the bike this year had made quite a big step from the 2024 bike, which was one of the problems with the difference between 2023 and 2024. They changed the aero a lot. They didn't change the engine particularly. Didn't change the chassis very much. So it was quite static, and it had some of the problems from the previous bike, along with a whole load of new problems. But both Bezzecchi and Martin praised the front end of the bike, said the front end of the bike was absolutely amazing, felt really, really good. Had some problems with the rear stability with the bike moving around, had to work on that. They have to work on some electronics. They have to work on some braking and some consistency. But they did say, we feel we've made a big step forward this year, and that's exactly what they need, because we know that Ducati are going to make a step forward, but it won't be as big a jump as between 2023 and 2024. So if Ducati make a small step forward and Aprilia make a big step forward, they're going to be a lot closer.
Yeah, I think Martin said best front feeling he's ever had in a motorcycle, going right the way through all the classes he's raced in. So that was a huge compliment. He said also, we could see it on the television screens. And I was watching on track in Barcelona at the one-day test after the final race of the year, that the bike was shaking a lot. It was quite unstable, but he said that through the day they managed to make some decent changes, which really improved that.
It wasn't because he was hungover.
Well, that may well have played a role in it. But generally speaking, I think he was probably a little surprised at the feeling with the bike and the progress they made in that one day in Barcelona. Even if that has always been a good track for Aprilia in the past.
Dave, what's your opinion on Stellacchini? He's on his third European manufacturer.
Yeah.
There's quite a lot of pressure on his shoulders.
Yep.
His predecessors jumped ship to Honda.
Yeah.
And he now has to create a motorcycle that, befits the talents of the world champion and one of the best riders in the last couple of years in MotoGP.
Yeah, for mere mortals, it's really difficult to judge the level of engineers. But so much of what people like Stellacchini do is not so much engineering pure sang, absolute pure engineering. It's much more about management. It's about getting enough of the data, finding the right people to do the right thing, get everyone talking to one another so that everyone understands each other's problems, and also that when you change on the bike, if you change the aerodynamics, that also has its effects on the electronics, on the engine, on the suspension, on the chassis, on everything. And so everyone has to understand that, okay, I want to do this, but if I do this, how's it going to affect you? Stellacchini said something really interesting I think he said something really interesting in Italian, and my Italian is enough to understand that I think he said something interesting, but not interesting enough not good enough to actually understand what it was. He was talking about spider graphs and about the various sort of ranges of performance and the way that you organise sort of race departments. So I need to go back and listen to that. But I think again, the real work is done by the engineers that we don't get to talk to, by the people who are back in the factory actually thinking up new ideas, and then progress is made by people like Stellacchini at the management level, organising that and recognising, okay, that's a good idea. How do we integrate it into a whole? A motorcycle is not an engine and a frame and some aerodynamics. A motorcycle is a motorcycle composed of components, and all those components have a really complex interplay, and you have to get it to work together.
Yeah, and he had a good apprenticeship in Borgo Panigale, under arguably one of the best kind of leader engineers, MotoGP scene in the modern era.
I think Stellacchini also said, it is easier when you're working in your own language, because he is back working with Italians, whereas in KTM he's working with German or Austrians whose first language is German or Austrian German, and they're communicating in English, and he's communicating with them in English in his second language. So there's lots of ways for subtleties to go missing. And again, in fact, on a tangent, that's going to be really interesting to see how Albesiano handles working at HRC with the Japanese engineers.
Yeah, and he probably won't be able to talk to us now, so we won't know for a couple of years. But one of the things that Stellacchini said, and to underline pretty much what we're saying, was that he said the priority was to fit the team, the rider, and the bike together, to make that link, because then the results will come. He said that's the priority first of all. I also like the fact that, he said that, the rider has less input these days. The analysis and the whole technical side in this modern age of MotoGP is almost, like for like in terms of value. I think he said something like, the rider is an awkward sensor. He doesn't have a CPU in his brain, which made me think, why did he sign the fucking master later then? If you can't rely on a cyborg, then what are your chances? But Neil, let's talk a bit about the world champion for a moment. I mean, you were talking about how positive everything seemed. He's not only going to have to deal with, being a leader of a project. He's also going to have to work on his own performance. He's going to have to represent the MotoGP brand and championship in, every corner that the championship visits. I just wondered how you kind of saw him. He didn't seem like someone under a lot of pressure, really.
No, he didn't. He seemed someone entirely content with his situation. Again, it's the start of the year. Many tests will come and will put him under the microscope like he probably hasn't been in years gone by. But he said he feels that he's come a long way even in the last year. This time a year ago, he was going through kind of a deep internal crisis in which he thought that he probably wasn't good enough to win the championship. And he managed to come through that. He had a lot of sleepless nights, but managed to come through that with the World Championship in the end. He said one thing that I found quite interesting. He said, if this was me a year ago and I was in this situation, I'd probably be saying stuff like, I'm going to show everyone that I'm the best. I'm going to show everyone just how good I am and that I can bring this project forward. And while he intimated that he's very enthusiastic and very optimistic, given the experiences he's had so far with Aprilia, he stopped short of making any bold declarations. He did say that if they have a couple of great preseason tests, they can go into the year with high expectations, but he wasn't really saying, watch out Pecco, watch out Mark, I'm coming for you. It was kind of a controlled optimism and a pretty mature performance, you have to say.
Also, one of the big markers for Aprilia, Dave, is the fact that Jorge Martin could win the first two races of the season, but then the bike could not work at all, and they're a second and a half off the pace per lap because they can't find any traction, as we saw in 2024. It's going to be hard to really call or to evaluate much of what's going on with him until maybe the depths of the 2025 calendar.
Yeah, but I mean, that's the same for every year, because what you see is the especially the first few races, all the flyaways, conditions are very different, tracks are very different. It's really difficult to get any sort of sense of consistency, and it's not until you really get into the meat of the European season, back at tracks where everyone has got 12 trillion laps and absolute sort of server buildings full of data that you really start to see where everyone was. I mean, we saw that last year as well. Maverick winning in
Kota.
In Kota. I think he had three wins because he had a couple of sprint wins, but they all came at the start of the season, and the second half of the season it all went to pieces.
Well, in Aragon, the BMW Lapper bikes were quicker than the Aprilias, weren't they? I mean,
exactly. So I mean, like that, and again, that was something that Stella Keeney also said. We have to make this thing more consistent over the season.
One thing that stood out for me from the press conferences, I asked, I think, Sterlicchini and Rivola if they felt that Martin was ready to become a leader of a factory, because he's never been in this situation before in MotoGP, and they both said, well, he's already a leader from what we can see. And Sterlicchini gave the example of, I think it was the Monday and then Tuesday in Barcelona at the test, and the way that he made himself known to all of the team, the way he introduced himself, and the way he gave little small motivational speeches to each and every one of them. I think he said it was like watching a leader of the United Nations make his way around the garage, and that he just took time to get to know everybody and also to give them a little bit of a pep talk, in that he spelled out his expectations for them, and he kind of wanted to know what they were doing and how that would affect his job in some way. So we heard this from Pramac. I think Daniele Romagnoli, his crew chief, who has followed him across to Aprilia, has said for the last couple of years that one of Martin's great strengths is making a fantastic atmosphere within a box and being able to motivate those around him very well. And you have to feel that is going to serve those at Aprilia well. He did also mention, Jorge mentioned that quite a different working method to what Aleix did in previous years. And you have to think Aleix was obviously a fantastic rider for Aprilia, but could be quite up and down emotionally, could be
hysterical,
slightly hysterical, slightly disparaging of some of his some of his colleagues, and per Antonio Jimenez, who's crew chief that's followed him across the HRC, definitely received both barrels on more than one occasion. And I think Martin is definitely going to bring a sort of more measured, less emotional approach to operations, which I think is really what you need to do to succeed at this level.
But then it also is the start of a relationship. And Ribeiro commented that we don't know each other and we haven't been through the tough times. And he kind of said it with a little bit of a wink, as if to say, we were still discovering each other. And, if Martin is uncompetitive and the frustration starts to build, then I think that's going to be the real test.
Yeah, I mean, what I found most interesting was, because I asked him about he's using a sports psychologist, and the way that changes. I mean, he got a really big boost from last year because he had to fix a few fundamental errors if he wanted to win a world championship. He did that. He managed frustration a lot better this year. When things went wrong, he stopped himself from hitting rock bottom. He was much more stable, and so that stability gave him consistency, and the consistency brought him the title. Now he has a completely different challenge, and there will be days where he's just nowhere, absolutely near the back of the field, because the bike just isn't working for whatever reason that might be. Now, because I asked, are you going to keep on doing a sports psychologist? He said, yeah, I'm going to do it for the rest of my life. Everyone should have one, which is a luxury that only elite athletes can afford. But still, he's right. Therapy, that kind of psychological assistance, is making him a much stronger person, and I think that's going to help him, especially in those really dark moments when things are going wrong and he can't see a path ahead, and he's not sure how to get to back to being competitive again. So yeah, that to me really impressed me.
When he goes to Aragon, you mean?
When he goes to Aragon and it's been absolutely chucking it down and there's mud all over the track and there's just no grip. Yeah, no, exactly.
Yeah, I think Bezzecchi also said that he's going to use his new teammate as a reference this year, and not just for what he can do on the motorcycle, but also for his approach. Bezzecchi did mention that last year, really tough time in 2024, really never got to grips with the GP23, struggled all the year, and did admit that there were times where he found it really difficult to motivate himself. And he said he just had to look at what Martin was able to do last year, the fact that he had such a crushing disappointment in missing out on the Ducati factory seat and had to change his plans completely for 2025, yet he used that experience in a positive way and never seemed to let it become stifling or too much of a burden on his shoulders. That was something that Marco felt he could learn from. So I think what you're saying is right. We're dealing with a very mature, complete rider at this point.
I don't think it's unfair to say that Marco Bezzecchi is not the sharpest rider in terms of using the media that we have on the MotoGP grid. But fair play to him today, because I think his initial words in the presentation, he really nipped in the bud the whole notion that him and Martin don't get on. That he said we weren't really kind of friends in the past, to paraphrase, yeah. But he kind of squashed that straight away. Any questions want to come up about, you don't like your teammate, or how are you going to work together, and there's past differences. How's that going to affect things? He kind of pretty much wiped the slate. Just was, we're friends now. I've kind of seen who he is. And
I'm sure that was completely honest and open.
Yeah, but it scrubs the question. I mean, you can go back and say, "Well, listen to what I said in Milan," and then he doesn't have to address it anymore. So I think that was quite savvy.
Well, until Martin accidentally knocks him off somewhere, and Bezzecchi goes into the garage and starts screaming at him. So,
or Bezzecchi beats Martin.
Or Bezzecchi beats Martin. That's also going to be interesting. Speaking of which, I have a question, gentlemen. Who's going to finish the season ahead of who at the end of the 2025 MotoGP season? Is Martin going to beat Bezzecchi, or is Bezzecchi going to beat Martin?
No, I think it's obvious. I think Martin ahead.
Yep.
I mean, I think so too, but I was just wondering if you had changed your...
I want to see what happens in the tests in the first races, but I still think there's a big question mark over Bezzecchi said about how he can set up a bike, because he wasn't up to the task last year with a former championship winning motorcycle.
Yeah, but there was only one rider who was up to that task really last year, and he's apparently quite good.
But yeah, I think Bezzecchi's jumped out of a very high-profile team and setup into another high-profile team and setup. I think it would be, enriching for him for his maturity and everything else, the whole sort of professionalism side. how he presents himself. He is a factory rider now. He can't hide behind a VR46 fluorescent yellow, or the mentor that is Valentino Rossi, or the team that he's called home for 6-7 seasons, through the categories. I think he has to be out front and center. So I'm interested to see how he deals with that.
Yep, as he said, when he sat down for the first time in Barcelona after getting off the bike and he saw a sea of faces, he thought, I can't really just speak any old bullshit. I have to be pretty nailed on with my comments. So, yeah, it does provide a new kind of challenge for him. And I think there's lots of interesting subplots that are going on behind the scenes and that will play out throughout 2025. But Bezzecchi, whether he can recover that 2023 level, I think is certainly one of them. Because this time last year we weren't talking about him as a potential title contender, but we were certainly considering him among the top names in the class, and certainly among the top names at Ducati that could win races, and it didn't play out that way. So, you just have to look back more than a season to see his real qualities, but how he will mesh with this project and being out of his comfort zone will be interesting.
Dave, Max Biaggi, as we mentioned, kind of opened the presentation. He said it's the strongest lineup Aprilia have ever had in MotoGP. Is it probably, it's obvious what's the strongest team on the grid for 2025, but do you think this is probably the second most, the team with the second most potential?
Yes, I think it is.
Ahead of maybe Binner and Acosta, or...
the thing with Binner and Acosta is that we don't know how good the KTM is going to be. It feels like the Aprilia is going to be closer. Really, the Aprilia was closer last year than the KTM. KTM would need to make a similarly big step to actually catch up. There's been all of these financial difficulties, and you have to know that will have an impact on how the bikes function, on the development of the bike. So that's a really, really big question to me. I think they're definitely the team with the second most potential. Again, you could look at Yamaha as well. Fabio Quartararo is clearly an elite rider. Alex Rins is also, I think, very good and quite underrated. But, Yamaha are still behind, and they've got a lot of work to do, and they've got a lot going on. We're going to see the V4 probably this year. So they're going to be developing the inline 4 and then develop the V4, and that's really going to put them out of contention in terms of actually vying for a championship. I think we'll see some surprising results, but, that's not the same. So I do think that, in terms of who has the most potential, it's Martin and Bezzecchi at Aprilia.
Yeah, Max Biaggi clearly forgets the 2000 season when Jeremy McWilliams was a Aprilia's rider and scored a number of podiums for them with the V-Twin 500.
One of my favourite moments from the presentation today, Neil, was when Massimo Ribola said that he expects Raul Fernandez to explode this year, and seeing Dave's facial expression to this comment was golden. But I
saw your elbow immediately go into Dave's ribs to try and get him to burst out laughing out loud, which I thought was quite insincere of you.
Yeah, no, well, he's definitely going to explode. And that's all I have to say on the issue.
You've been a bit unwell, Dave, so you were wearing one of those medical masks, to try and prevent your...
Giving everyone else my dreaded lurgy.
Exactly, yeah. But really what you were doing is you're trying to hide your expression during that particular moment of the press conference.
It did turn out quite useful.
The problem is those masks don't really hide a giggle, so that was slightly worrying. But then it was a sign again of this effusive enthusiasm around Aprilia, that they're talking very But
they see, it's the same as Maverick Vinales. They can see his data. They can see what Raul is capable of. I can see what Raul is capable of. He's incredibly talented. He's incredibly fast. We saw 2-3 times just how good he can be. Raul Fernandez's problem that he needs to be that good week in, week out. If he does that week in, week out, then all of a sudden you start to sit up and really take notice. In the end, I keep banging on about this. You're as good as your worst results. It's your worst results that win you championships. And Raul Fernandez is very good at having his worst results week in, week out.
Jesus. Just quickly mentioning Trackhouse Racing, because they launched the day before this one in Aprilia. So all the Aprilias are out. Thoughts, guys? Because it was a little bit low key. Some of the...
It was really odd.
Okay.
Yeah, slightly surprised. I mean, there was an announcement that Gulf was going to come on board as a sponsor, and I was expecting that to be a more prominent feature of the livery. But
Yeah, rather than the 50 quid sticker on the front fender.
Well, you mentioned an empty canvas. I can't help but look at the bike, wondering there's going to be an announcement about a title sponsor coming up, because it is laid bare. I mean, it looks like a Moto2 team, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. It almost looks like a club racer. I hope so. I hope they have got other sponsors coming up. But let's see. But yeah, there's been a lot of changes in Trackhouse, obviously, also because there's a lot of personnel coming and going. People have left the team, either voluntarily or involuntarily. So yeah, it's not a very stable environment at the moment. It's going to be interesting to see what they do this year. But it did seem very much like it was a very low budget affair. Basically, it was only Dorna who flew across, did some filming, and showed off they basically unveiled the bike. They did some hastily assembled photographs. Our photographer friends were complaining about the fact that nobody had actually bothered to iron out the
remove the covers.
Yeah, no. Well, there was a sheet, so the bike was placed on the sheet, and the front wheel was the sheet was all scrunched up underneath the front wheel, and that hadn't been photoshopped out. So there was a lot of complaining about from photographers about that. It's it's your Photoshop 101. So yeah, it did feel like it had been done really, really quickly and really haphazardly.
I can't help but feel there's more to come from Trackhouse. I mean, they were the first team to sort of really announce anything big. You know, their livery for this year, it looks kind of like an old Suzuki to me, that blue.
Yeah.
But I guess they have to sort of dovetail a little bit with the NASCAR setup and everything else they have going on.
Yeah, because it's a much bigger thing. Also, like on the NASCAR cars, there weren't a lot of sponsors all over the NASCAR cars either. So despite that program being really successful, they've had a lot of wins there. So you do think that there is a lot more going on behind there. Justin Marks being involved with sort of other deals, and you sort of look at how that whole thing is going to tie in. There's also the track near Nashville, whose name escapes me temporarily, that we were likely to be going to possibly as early as next year to have a second US Grand Prix. You sort of think that there's stuff bubbling up.
Well, that's pretty much it. We've got to grab a shuttle back to the airport, Neil. Dave, you have the good fortune to fly out from Linate Airport, which is just over the road from here.
Milan Malpensa is it's arguably, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, it's the worst one in the world because it's a long way from Milan and it's up the worst motorway in the world. It's just it's terrible. So sympathies. It's quite a nice airport, I think, once you're actually there, but you just never want to leave it.
Yeah, says the man that's never been to Paris Beauvais.
Oh, this is true. No, this is true. But I have been to Eindhoven, so there is that.
We'll be back here, Neil, in a couple of days. We'll be back here for the Ducati presentation. Dave, you're not coming this time?
No, my health isn't sufficient that I can actually do a full day, because it's like 2 days and it's full on, and I just can't handle it at the moment. So I shall listen into your comments and then tell you why you're all wrong.
We shall abuse the dessert tray for you.
Yeah, that's right. All the more tiramisu for you. That's all I'm saying.
Patreon. Go and check out Patreon, because we will be uploading the audio files from Jorge Martin and Marco Bezzecchi in the presentation today. So especially for our Patreon followers, you'll be able to hear exactly what the riders said. On our YouTube channel as well, Dave and Neil spoke around the RSGP's to 2025s right after the presentation. So we got a little video there, just like 10 minutes long. If you want to see the bikes or us reacting to the bikes, then that video can be found on YouTube. Apart from that, we'll be back with another podcast, as we said, from Madonna di Campiglio and the 2025 Ducati Lenovo team launch. Other than that, guys, good to see you, and let's roll on with the podcast for this year.